This happened when I was just 12 years old, and might take a little backstory for it to make sense. So, at the time, I was a young girl about to start high school. Now, I had some anxiety from the stress of changing schools and some family trouble, which didn't make things any easier for me. So, my mother is from Nova Scotia, and my father is from Europe. We were staying in a cabin in Nova Scotia. I won't say exactly where, but it was a place where we stayed almost every summer, so I was used to sleeping there. The cabin is located on the water, with another property on one side and a patch of forest on the other. This happened one day in August, but I can't seem to remember the exact date. At the time, my father was away for the night to visit a friend, so it was just me, my twin sister, who we'll just call Annabelle, my little brother, we'll call him Thomas, and my mother Amanda, of course, not their real names. So, I was listening to something on my iPad, I don't remember what, and looking out to the window at the forest. For the longest time, it was just forest, nothing for me to be alarmed about. But after an hour or so, I saw something in the woods. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of car headlights on the leaves. But when I kept looking at it, I realized that they were eyes. 2 large, gray, oval-shaped eyes. I didn't know what to do at first. I was paralyzed. I slowly walked away from the window, and the eyes shifted their gaze as whatever it was disappeared into the woods. I was shaken, but decided not to tell anyone, and tried to rationalize it as just being a reflection, as I had thought before. I didn't see anything else for the rest of the night, but the next morning is when I got a really good scare. I was sleeping in a room with my brother and my mother, while my sister slept down the hall. It was very hot, so I was having trouble sleeping. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, I had a dream. It was one of those dreams where you're just running, but you don't really know why, except this time, I did know what I was running from. I didn't even need to look back to know what I was running from. It was the creature from the woods, and it was chasing me on all fours from the sound of it. The dream only lasted a few seconds, but the worst part was when I woke up. My heart was beating faster than it ever had before, and I couldn't open my eyes, no matter how hard I tried. I felt as though something was holding them closed. All I could hear was my heart beating, but I could also hear this other sound. It sounded like heavy, raspy breath, mixed with shrill screaming. After about 15 seconds, that felt like 15 minutes, I could open my eyes again, but I almost wish I hadn't. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, 7-foot-tall creature slowly going out the door of the room. The creature's skin was a light gray, and looked not scaly, but almost like that of a frog. Its mouth stretched across its face, and when it opened its mouth, it opened much wider than any human could. It didn't look at me as it walked out of the room, and I just stared at it as it walked down the stairs and right through the locked front door. I didn't sleep much after that, and in the morning, I decided not to tell my family about it, since they did not see or hear the creature, and I did not want them to think I was insane. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but this was not the last time I saw that creature. Later that summer, we were back in our apartment. Now, our apartment looks over a street with 6 lanes, so there's almost always at least one car on that stretch of road, even late at night. So the night this took place, it was around 11 o'clock at night, and I was the only one in our living room. I was going to go to bed when I noticed something unusual outside my window. The street outside was completely empty, not even a parked car, but what I did see still makes me shudder whenever I think about it. The creature from the cabin was slowly walking down the road. At first, it just walked down the road. Then it stopped. Slowly, and to my horror, it turned its head up to make eye contact with me. Our apartment building has many levels, and it was at least 60 feet from our building. It met my eyes exactly. This lasted for about 5 seconds. Then, it looked away, and I ran to my bed as fast as I could. To this day, I still do not know what I saw those 2 nights, and if anybody has any idea what I saw, please let me know. I haven't seen this creature since, and I hope I never see anything like that again. Growing up, my life wasn't always easy. I've had a lot of strange things happen to me on my time growing up around my parents' house and my grandfather's farm. I would go and spend the summer at my grandparents' most years just to get away from my toxic home environment, due to my parents' constant fighting. It was never stable, but it was at my grandparents' house that things went to a whole different level of uncomfortable. My grandparents were sweet and loving people, and that was never a problem. They loved us more than their own children, it seemed. But I can't help but shake the feeling that every time I played outside as a kid, I was always being watched, very closely. There were times at night when you could get this weird feeling in the air, like static electricity or something. Sometimes I would be awakened in the middle of the night by a loud metallic banging, or what sounded like that, far off in the woods. Looking out the window, sometimes at night, you could see a strange blue, red, and green lights glowing and fading, then glowing and fading. I guess pulsating would be the right word. Sometimes I would catch dark figures darting throughout the trees just beyond where I was playing, and I always just thought it was animals. But as I got older, I became all the more wiser. Besides, all of that strange phenomenon, there's just one account that really stands out to me as terribly freaky and puts me on the edge to this day. Speaking of edge, on the very edge of my grandparents' farm, they had this really large storm drain. It was one of those storm drains that were big enough that you could walk in and stand up in, and then that went underneath another concrete platform that my grandfather had. Listen, it's difficult to explain, but it led off into the small pond, and that small pond, in turn, turned into a tiny creek, and then that went into the woods. When I was probably about 11 or 12, I was playing by this small pond, and I started hearing noise within the large storm drain, the same storm drain that I would play in sometimes. The noise made its way closer and closer to where I was playing, and at first, I thought maybe it was my grandfather who was in there doing something, but it sounded much heavier. I could begin to hear the raspy, heavy, withered breathing. Then, I began to feel the air around me change, and I felt imminent danger. I started to back off and run, and I hid behind a nearby tree. I peeked my head out, and not even 5 seconds later, this monstrosity crawls out of the drain pipe and plops down into the small pond, then climbs out and wanders off into the woods as if nothing ever happened, not even looking around to check its surroundings. It was tall, a very purple, humanoid-looking creature, very gangly, and had long appendages dangling from its back and arms. Its head was pointed and had a very stretched face, if that makes any sense. Like if somebody were to grab somebody's face from behind and pull it back. Like Botox, I guess. Looking back now, it kind of reminded me of a cross between an alien, like a Gray, a creature from Tim Burton's Nightmares, and a Pirates of the Caribbean creature, like one of the underwater Davy Jones creatures. I feel like that would be the best way to sum it up, but it was sure as hell freaky looking, and scared me so bad that I ran back to my grandfather crying, who tried to comfort me and reassure me that there was nothing over there. The thing even walked funny, like it was drunk, or kind of staggered just like how a zombie does. I had nightmares about that moment for a long time now, and I could remember vividly what it looks like. Maybe I should sit down sometime and draw it out so I can send it to you so you could share it with everybody. That was the only time I've ever seen something like that. I continued to stay there and visit as my life went on, and the strange sounds, the strange lights, and the feelings, all of that continued, but I never had a sighting of that thing again. I never played by the pond or the storm drain after that either, so I guess I can never be fully too sure that it didn't come back to pay a visit. To begin this tale, there are a few things you should know. This happened during my first semester of my sophomore year in college. It was winter at this time, so snow was everywhere, and the moon was usually blacked out by clouds. I lived and went to college in the Black Hills. For those of you who don't know, it's a giant national forest made up of dense pine trees. It also overlaps the Native American reservation land and was the site of many confrontations during the Indian relocation, which is important to remember. Finally, like many college students, I like to let loose and have a little bit of fun every now and then. On this particular night, my friends and I thought it would be chill to drive through a nearby scenic canyon just right outside of town, smoke a bit of pot, and look at the stars. We accomplished the first two tasks, the second of which was done with great enthusiasm. But it was hard to look at the stars because clouds were drifting across the sky and blocking up most of it. This is where the story actually takes off. There were 5 of us in total that night. I and one other friend just wanted to head back to campus and maybe play some video games, chill for the rest of the night. The other 3 thought it would be a great idea to find a random trail and take a night hike through the forest. Since majority rules, we went with that option and found a pretty secluded area with several trails rounding through dense parts of the forest. We all got out, grabbed some blankets from the trunk to wrap around ourselves because it was just so dang cold, picked a trail at random, and started off. Now, to tell you the truth, I'm a pretty jumpy individual that gets spooked easily. Compound that with my heavy anxiety, darkness, and weed, and you have one scared girl that just wants to go home. I did not say anything to my friends, however, because they were having a good time, and I didn't want to be a Debbie Downer and ruin it. We had been on the trail for about 20 minutes and had been using the lights on our phones because, again, the night sky was obscured and obstructed by clouds. The trail wasn't even halfway done at this point. My friend at the front of the group stopped suddenly and flashed her phone up to the trees on the one side of the trail in front of us a few yards. She said, "Did you guys see that?" We all copied her and flashed our phones up there. At first, I thought she was just hallucinating from the weed, but then a shape started to take form. My initial reaction was that it was a bobcat, since it was lower to the ground than a mountain lion and seemed to be crouching. One friend shouted, "Oh crap, it's a deer. I was scared for a second." Another said, "No, it's a rabbit." No one seemed to be able to pinpoint what it was or what size it should be. As we were arguing what it was, it turned its head toward us and its eyes flashed in our phone lights. I gotta tell ya, I've been hunting all my life, have had all types of cats, dogs, cattle, you name it around me as I grew up. This means I have seen quite a few animals and how their eyes shine glow, either from predator or prey. This thing, its eyes were both that of an animal and completely different. That I did not know what on God's green earth it was. It was not human, animal, or anything I had come across before. It chilled me more than the cold of winter ever could. After it turned toward us, my friend had died off in their arguing and had begun what I can only describe as sick, terrifying sort of stare-off between all 5 of us and this creature. Then, it did something that I will never forget for as long as I live. It stood up. I thought it was a bobcat. My friends had thought it was animals of varying size, but nothing extraordinarily large. As it stood, it kept going higher and higher and higher until it reached what I assumed to be at least 7 to 8 feet, if not larger. I assume it was larger because as soon as it hit that mark, my friends and I all started screaming and sprinting back the way we had come. A trail that took us 20 minutes to stumble through in our state took us only 5 when we're running like our lives depended on it. We all dove into the car, the driver floored it, and we sped all the way back to campus. After catching our breaths, we kept asking each other things like, "What was that? Did you see that thing? Was that real?" The night we all recollected what we saw solidified that it was not just a hallucination, and decided it was some sort of animal, and agreed to move on with our lives. Only, I can't. My friends all told me it was just a bear, to not worry, because we had gotten away. I can't believe it. That thing, from what I had seen of it, what had emaciated and protruding bones under its skin. I couldn't see if it was skin or fur, just its silhouette and shadows around it, and flashes of its build. Also, it was the middle of winter. No bears would be out there, and they also never ventured to this part of the Black Hills. Remember how I mentioned reservation land around the area? Well, even though I myself am not a Native American, I had grown up on a reservation of the Lakota Sioux, the same tribe that inhabit parts of the Black Hills. They have many, many myths and folklore about various creatures that live in the hills. I took it upon myself to think back on some of the legends that I was told growing up, and also asked some of the elders from the tribe that I knew. They gave me some possible answers. I will tell you two of them. The first one is an innocent, if not familiar character from the Lakota legends. He is their version of Bigfoot. Lakota tribe members and storytellers debate whether or not this is a singular creature or an entire species, but all the same, it is a mostly harmless being that just wanders the forest and can act as an older brother in native stories. Altogether, it would not have been that terrifying if that was what was on the trail that night. However, I unfortunately have to side with the next creature as being the most probable one we met. There is a malicious spirit in the Lakota myth called Doubleface. He takes the shape of a man, sometimes an animal, sometimes something in between. He is also described as looking like an ogre, but I'd like to keep Shrek out of this. His front face is that of a human, if a bit disfigured. If you see this one, you are fine, but if not, and you stick around, he will try to convince you to take a peek at the face on the back of his head, which, once you look at it, will paralyze you or kill you with a single glare. If it does not kill you, Doubleface will finish the deed by beating you to death or eating you alive. That's a common theme in a lot of native lore: cannibalism. I ruled out Wendigos because if it had been one, I would not be alive to tell this story. You might think it's ridiculous that I am putting so much credence on these supposed myths, but until you have seen what I saw in the dark of the night in the Black Hills, sat at a campfire with elders as they blessed you with sage, and listened as they provided you with both answers and caution moving forward, you will never understand how terrifying it is to realize that not all legends stay in stories.